government to intervene before Longannet is threatened with premature closure, because it will be needed for several years to come. And frankly, Gordon, you know, one of the reasons why it's needed is to secure voltage stability. Another one is black start, where the whole system goes out in Scotland. Longannet is essential to bringing electricity back after Cruachan gets going. So on a whole variety of reasons, our experts say that Longannet is essential for the short term.
Okay, Patrick Harvey, do you buy this idea that the problem is all these UK transmission charges? Because Fergus Ewing is absolutely right to say in their 2013 document they mentioned this issue of access to the national grid, but it was all in connection with renewables. This idea that Longannet needs preferential treatment or better treatment doesn't seem to have come up until the last few weeks.
Well, there was a debate about this in the Scottish Parliament just a few days ago, and while some members were placing all of the emphasis on transmission charges and some members were placing all of the emphasis on other factors, like the Tories placing it on their opposition to wind power, I think the reality is that all of these are factors. The transmission charges, as you say, that's not a new factor. It's one that the Scottish Government may have been expecting to recede, but it is receding less quickly. But it's not a new factor, and it should have been taken into account. I think I'm also concerned about this reliance that the Scottish Government has on CCS, which, as you rightly pointed out, is not something that just works out of the box. It has some potential, and I support research and development into that, but we don't yet know if it's going to be viable on an industrial scale.
R&D is one thing. Building a power station by 2020 is something completely different.
And we do need an approach which says, OK, here's what we can do if CCS ends up working on an industrial scale, but also alternative pathways that include the scenario in which that isn't available. I think that requires a much greater emphasis on interconnectivity, on efficient transmission, not just across to the rest of the UK, but across the North Sea as well, which can be done without transmission losses.
Tom Greatorex, if you think the Scottish Government's position is incoherent, and I presume you do, what would you do instead?
Well, what we've heard from Fergus around black starts is completely wrong, firstly. What he's saying in terms of transmission charging, is, as you said, it's not a new issue, and Project Transmit would actually benefit Longannet when it comes into effect, and there's a legal challenge which has meant that it's taking longer than it otherwise would have done. And I'm just thankful that we exist in a world where we have a GB market, because on now, for at least part of one day in every 6, power is coming south to north. And that's part of the benefit of being part of that market, and that's frankly where I think is what's going to keep our lights on.
But I think Fergus Ewing is saying he wants to build a new either coal or gas powered plant by around about 2020. Would you go along with that? Well, in Scotland, I mean, obviously Scotland can import baseload to some extent.
But yeah, and the grid connection, the work that's happening now on the West Coast bootstrap work, which was accelerated, which is paid for by consumers across the UK, will massively increase the capacity.
But you haven't answered my question. Would you support what Fergus Ewing wants to do? Or you could say, for example, why don't we have another nuclear reactor at Torness instead?
Well, I think new nuclear is going to be part of the UK mix.
In Scotland?
Well, we're either going to have to import it through the interconnection from England, or we're going to have to build some more in Scotland. I suspect it will end up being because of the political situation.
Another reactor at Torness?
Well, I wouldn't be against new nuclear being part of the mix in Scotland, and part of the mix. It needs to be part of the mix across the UK. But you know, that's my view. But I think the important point here is we have an increasingly imbalanced mix in Scotland. That is causing real pressure. It means we're importing more from England than we were before. And on one day last year, 26th of December, 1% of our generation came from renewables. 1%. And that shows you just how stark it can get when the weather conditions mean that we're not producing enough wind.
Now, some Greens would say new nuclear is a great idea. For some reason, you've set your face against it.
Well, I don't know any voices in the capital G Green movement, if you like, the mainstream environmental NGOs or in the political party.
You know that.
There are people who have been long-standing environmentalists who've changed their position on nuclear.
Surely you would rather have a new nuclear reactor at Torness than what Fergus Ewing is talking about.
There are some who've changed their position to say that very reluctantly. I have to say that in Scotland, I don't think, even if there was a political will for new nuclear, I don't think it could be built fast enough to address the immediate issues. And what I think, if we're serious about a sustainable energy system in the long term, that is going to include more connection between countries. That's the case not just within GB but across the European Union. There's a great deal of emphasis, more so than there was maybe 5 or 10 years ago, on getting efficient transmission between countries. That's where our future is going to be. And we shouldn't be at all worried about the fact that we'll export very often and import sometimes. That's fine by me.
Fergus Ewing, can I ask you what it's going to cost us all? In this 2013 paper, which you keep insisting I don't understand, one of the things you did was you quoted DEC figures, which claimed that by 2020, if we had a big policy of ramping up renewables, electricity would be cheaper for consumers than the status quo. Given the fact that coal prices, oil prices and gas prices have all fallen very substantially since then, is that position still tenable?
Well, I think it is, although you're right to say things have changed since 2013. And however, the cost of the new nuclear station in Hinkley Point, the subsidies there, Gordon, are the daddy of them all. 35 billion plus 10 billion loan guarantees. And you may have noticed that
it's still 50%. I think it's 50% more than the base load, the contract for different price. The offshore wind that you like so much is 100% more.
Well, no, it's not.
So it's 3 times base load.
I was about to say, Gordon, that it's not. And the point I was going to make was that the contracts for difference, which were awarded this week by the UK government, the cost of onshore wind is now cheaper per megawatt hour than nuclear.
No, I was talking about offshore.
And the cost of offshore wind has gone down to around 120 or below. So
which is still 20% higher than nuclear.
Well, it is at the moment, but of course it's early days, and the cost of wind energy has been rapidly coming down over the past decade. I think we need a balance, Gordon. There's no doubt about that, and we do need more thermal capacity. But the problem is, which investor in any of the major companies that build power stations would choose to build in a location where, since Labour introduced the hard charging in 2005, we have 40 million extra costs. The immediate threat to Longannet is one that I do hope all parties in Scotland can unite behind the Scottish Government's pleas to the UK to avoid a premature loss of our flagship generating station.
All right, Luke, we'll have to leave it there. Luke, thank you all very much indeed.